You're standing at the base of Mount Taygetus, southern Greece, 2018. Archaeologists have just uncovered something that changes everything we thought we knew about Sparta. Not at the famous cliff where legend says Spartans threw deformed infants, but 3 miles away, in a hidden ravine that doesn't appear on any ancient map. Inside, they find bones. Hundreds of them. Children's bones. But here's what makes forensic anthropologists go silent: these aren't newborns who died from a fall. These are children aged 7, 12, and 16. The exact ages of the Agoge's 3 critical transition points. And the manner of death isn't exposure or starvation. The skeletal trauma pattern suggests something far more deliberate. Far more systematic. Far more horrifying than any ancient source ever recorded. You think you know the story of Sparta. The warriors who never retreated. The society that produced the finest soldiers in ancient Greece. The legend of 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. But that legend was built on bodies. Children's bodies. Systematically eliminated at precise ages according to criteria that had nothing to do with physical deformity. For 2,400 years, ancient writers avoided describing what actually happened in the Agoge, Sparta's brutal training system. They mentioned harsh conditions. They referenced eliminations. They spoke vaguely of those who didn't survive. But they never detailed the methodology. Never explained the selection criteria. Never described the execution protocols. Because what Sparta did to its own children wasn't just harsh training. It was systematic human sacrifice disguised as education. A machine designed to produce 10,000 warriors by eliminating 30,000 children. And the archaeological evidence, from the hidden pits, from forensic analysis, from the ages of the dead, proves the cliff story was a myth designed to hide something far worse. Several show no trauma at all, suggesting possible poisoning. These weren't children who died from training accidents. These were systematic eliminations. Time period. Carbon dating places the remains between 520 to 370 BCE, Sparta's peak military period. This wasn't ancient history to Plutarch. This was systematic practice continuing for 150 years. The burial method. Children weren't carefully buried. They were disposed of. Bodies thrown into the pit in batches. No grave goods. No ceremony. No dignity. The archaeological team's preliminary report used unusually strong language. Evidence suggests systematic elimination of juveniles according to predetermined criteria and timeline. Translation: Sparta was culling its children according to a schedule. Now we need to look at what ancient writers actually recorded about the Agoge. Because when you know what to look for, the hints are everywhere. Xenophon, 430 to 354 BCE, who lived in Sparta and knew the system firsthand. Many boys died during the training because of the excessive hardships. Not some boys. Many boys. Expected losses. Plutarch again, describing the Agoge. At age 7, boys were organized into groups and lived communally. They who showed the most leadership and fought most fiercely were made captains. The others kept their eyes on these, obeyed their orders, and endured their punishments in silence. Wait, punishment severe enough to require specific mention? From other children? Then this line: not all who entered the Agoge completed it. Those who fell behind were cast out. Cast out. What does that mean? Pausanias, 2nd century CE. The Spartans have a place called Phobonthrones where they test boys' courage. Those found wanting do not remain with the others. Do not remain. Where did they go? Every ancient source mentions elimination. Casualties. Boys who didn't survive or were cast out. But none describe the actual process. Why? Because what Sparta did violated fundamental Greek norms about child rearing. Even Athens, which practiced routine infant exposure, didn't systematically kill 7 to 16-year-olds. So ancient writers used euphemisms. Vague language. References without details. They documented that it happened. They just refused to say how. Until archaeologists found the pit. Age 7. Every Spartan boy was taken from his mother and entered the agoge. But not every boy who entered survived the first year. Let's reconstruct what happened based on forensic evidence and what ancient sources hint at. The initial evaluation. Ancient sources describe an immediate sorting upon entry. Boys were assessed for physical capability, tested for pain tolerance, evaluated for obedience and aggression, watched for signs of weakness. But weakness didn't mean physical disability. The forensic evidence proves that. Analysis of the age 7 skeletons from Site Crypti 12 shows normal bone development. No evidence of chronic disease or deformity. Adequate nutrition before death. Standard growth patterns. These weren't sickly children. So what got them eliminated? The criteria of weakness. Based on later Greek sources discussing Spartan values, weakness included crying or showing emotion. Sparta trained emotionless warriors. Boys who cried when separated from mothers were marked. Refusing to fight other boys. The agoge encouraged violence among trainees. Boys who wouldn't fight were eliminated. Showing mercy or compassion. Helping a weaker boy. Sharing food. Any sign of softness. Questioning authority. Even at age 7, absolute obedience was required. Think about that. 7-year-old children eliminated for crying after being torn from their mothers. For not being aggressive enough. For showing compassion. The first-year attrition. Ancient sources suggest approximately 20% of boys didn't survive the first year. If 1,000 boys entered at age 7, only 800 made it to age 8. Where did the 200 go? The pit shows us. Deliberate trauma. Organized disposal. Systematic elimination. Age 12. The first major evaluation point. Boys who survived to age 12 faced tests specifically designed to identify who would advance to warrior training and who would be eliminated. The Cryptia trial. At age 12, boys faced a ritual called the Cryptia, often mistranslated as secret service or police force. But recent analysis of ancient descriptions suggests something different. The Cryptia wasn't a role. It was a trial. A test of a boy's willingness to kill. Here's how it worked based on Plutarch's account and modern analysis. Groups of 12-year-old boys were sent into the countryside. Given minimal supplies. Told to survive by any means. But here's the critical detail Plutarch mentions. They were armed with daggers and set upon the helots during the night, killing those they caught abroad. Read that again. 12-year-old boys. Sent to murder enslaved people. As a test. Boys who refused. Boys who showed hesitation. Boys who returned without kills. Marked as too weak for warrior training. The diamastigosis. Another age 12 ritual, the diamastigosis, whipping at the altar. Ancient sources describe boys being whipped at the altar of Artemis Orthia. The one who endured longest without crying won honor. But archaeological evidence from the sanctuary suggests this wasn't just a test of endurance. It was a culling mechanism. Excavations at the Artemis Orthia sanctuary in the 1920s found an altar platform stained with what analysis confirms is human blood. Iron whips with barbed ends. No medical facilities nearby. Some boys didn't survive the whipping. That was the point. The ritual eliminated boys whose pain tolerance was insufficient for battle. The age 12 forensic evidence. The skeletons from site crypti 12 aged 12 to 13 show more severe trauma than the age 7 remains. Evidence of deliberate beating as cause of death. Some show rib fractures consistent with being crushed. Others show skull trauma from single blows. These boys weren't dying from accidents. They were being killed after failing evaluations. Age 16. The last major elimination before full citizenship and warrior status. Boys who survived to 16 faced the most brutal tests of all. The test of endurance. Ancient sources describe a final trial at age 16 involving survival in the wilderness for extended periods. But they omit the critical detail: boys who returned too quickly or showed signs of having had it too easy were suspect. The test wasn't just survival. It was about willingness to embrace brutality as normal. Boys who returned psychologically healthy, who hadn't been fundamentally broken by the experience, were seen as weak. Potentially unreliable in battle. The dining test. At age 16, boys were evaluated for entrance into Syssitia, the communal dining groups that would define their adult warrior life. The test was simple: would current warriors accept them? If no dining group voted to include a boy, he couldn't advance to full citizenship. He became a trembler, a failed Spartan, stripped of all rights. But here's what ancient sources don't explain: what happened to boys rejected at age 16? They couldn't return to their families, that wasn't allowed. They couldn't become helots, they were Spartan-born. They couldn't leave Sparta, emigration was forbidden. So where did they go? The pit shows us. The age 16 remains. The skeletal evidence from age 16-17 children in site crypti 12 shows the most disturbing patterns. Several show evidence of prolonged starvation before death. Some show skeletal stress patterns consistent with being restrained for extended periods. Multiple skeletons show trauma consistent with falling from height, but not the height of Taygetus Cliff. Several show no trauma at all, suggesting they may have been forced to choose suicide. These weren't quick deaths. These were prolonged eliminations. Now we need to talk about Sparta's definition of weakness. Because modern people hear weak children eliminated and think of physical disability. That's not what Sparta meant. Analysis of the skeletal remains proves this. 90% plus of eliminated children show normal physical development. No evidence of chronic disease or genetic disorders. Bone strength and muscle attachment patterns indicate active, healthy children. Nutritional markers show adequate feeding. These weren't disabled children. These were normal children who failed behavioral or psychological criteria. Weak in Sparta meant emotional, showing fear, sadness, compassion, mercy. Social, inability to dominate other boys, refusing to participate in violence. Psychological, questioning orders, hesitating to kill, showing moral doubt. Sparta wasn't eliminating disabled children. It was eliminating children who remained human. Children who cried. Children who helped others. Children who questioned why they had to murder enslaved people. Children who couldn't endure watching their friends die. Those were the weak ones. The archaeological evidence proves that Sparta's selection system wasn't about physical fitness. It was about psychological compliance. They were breeding psychopaths. Systematically. By killing everyone who showed normal human emotion. Now we need to discuss the actual methods of elimination. Because the forensic evidence reveals execution protocols that ancient sources refuse to describe. Method 1: Beating to death. Approximately 40% of remains show perimortem blunt force trauma. Pattern analysis suggests systematic beating, not random violence. Often to the head and torso. Consistent with being beaten by multiple people. Death likely occurred over minutes to hours. Who did the beating? Likely older boys in the agoge. Part of their training. Teaching older students to kill younger ones who failed served dual purposes, eliminated the weak and desensitized the strong. Method 2: Exposure in the pits. Some remains show no immediate trauma but evidence of prolonged suffering. Skeletal stress patterns indicating restraint. Evidence of dehydration and starvation. Defensive wounds on hands and arms. These children were likely thrown into the pits alive and left to die. Slowly. Over days. The ravine where site crypty 12 was found would have been perfect, deep enough that children couldn't climb out, hidden enough that screams wouldn't reach settlements. Method 3: Execution by single blow. Several skulls show evidence of single blow trauma from behind. Deliberate, aimed strikes. Enough force to kill immediately. Consistent with execution rather than beating. This suggests some children were given a merciful, quick death. Possibly those who had performed well but not well enough. Possibly as a reward for obedience until the end. Method 4: Forced suicide. The most disturbing evidence, several age 16 skeletons show fall trauma but from heights of only 15 to 20 feet, not enough for certain death. Forensic analysis suggests these children jumped or fell repeatedly until death occurred. Were they pushed? Or forced to jump until they died? Ancient sources mention that trembling Spartans, those who failed, were socially dead. Perhaps physical death was framed as their only honorable option. Imagine, 16-year-old children, told they're too weak for Sparta, given a choice between exile, which means death anyway, or jumping until they die. Some apparently chose jumping. Now we need to understand the scale of Sparta's elimination system. Because Site Crypti 12 isn't the only pit. Between 2018 and 2023, follow-up surveys of the Taygetus region have identified at least 7 similar sites. All hidden in ravines or caves. All containing children's remains. All showing similar age distributions, 7, 12, 16. all within 10 miles of ancient Sparta. Conservative estimates based on these discoveries. If site crypti 12 contained 150 children over 150 years, that's one child per year per site. With 7 known sites, approximately 7 children eliminated per year through this disposal method alone. But the pits only show us one disposal method. Ancient sources suggest some eliminated children were given to helots as slaves. Some were used as practice targets for older boys. Some simply disappeared with no record. If we assume the pits represent only 25% of total eliminations, and if 7 children per year were disposed of in pits, then approximately 28 children per year were eliminated across all methods. Over 150 years of peak practice, 4,200 children systematically killed. And this is conservative. Some scholars suggest the actual number could be 2 to 3 times higher. The math of the agoge. Ancient sources estimate approximately 8,000 to 10,000 adult Spartan warriors at any given time during Sparta's peak. If warriors served from age 20 to 60, that's 40 years of service. With 10,000 warriors and 40-year service, approximately 250 new warriors needed per year. If 250 boys succeeded annually, and the elimination rate was 60 to 70% across all ages, then approximately 625 to 833 boys entered the agoge each year. That means 375 to 583 boys eliminated annually. Over 150 years, 56,000 to 87,000 children. That's not training. That's industrial-scale child murder. So why did ancient writers refuse to describe this system clearly? Because what Sparta did was horrifying even by ancient standards. Greek city-states practiced infant exposure. They enslaved conquered populations. They executed prisoners. But systematically murdering their own children, aged 7 to 16, based on psychological criteria. That was unique to Sparta. And it revealed something uncomfortable. Sparta's military success wasn't despite brutality, it was because of it. Sparta produced superior warriors not through superior training, but through superior selection. They didn't train boys to be fearless. They killed boys who showed fear and kept the ones who didn't. It was genetic and psychological selection through systematic murder. Ancient writers admired Sparta's military prowess. They didn't want to acknowledge that it came from killing thousands of children. So they used euphemisms. Vague references. Implications without details. They let everyone believe the cliff myth, that Sparta eliminated only deformed infants, quickly, mercifully. Because that was acceptable. Distasteful but understandable. Many Greek cities did similar things. But the truth? That Sparta systematically murdered healthy children for crying, for showing compassion, for hesitating to kill. That was monstrous. Pause. Stand in the Taygetus foothills today. The ravines are still there. Site crypti 12 has been reburied to protect the remains. But now we know what happened there. Hundreds of children. Ages 7, 12, 16. Beaten to death. Left to die in pits. Forced to jump until they died. Eliminated for being too human in a society that demanded they become weapons. The myth of Spartan excellence was built on their bones. For 2,400 years, we've celebrated Sparta. The warrior society. The defenders of Greece at Thermopylae. the epitome of military discipline. But every Spartan warrior represents 2 to 3 children who were murdered so he could take their place. That's the truth ancient Greece refused to record. That's the truth we've refused to acknowledge. Subscribe if you believe we need to stop romanticizing Sparta and face what they actually did. Leave a comment. Does knowing this change how you view the Spartan ideal? Because the question isn't whether Sparta produced excellent warriors. They did. The question is whether excellence built on the systematic murder of children is worth celebrating. And why it took us 2,400 years to ask.